9. Britalia Samantha. Things took an unexpectedly tragic turn for several Newcastle, Delaware residents earlier this year when they found themselves caught in the throes of a woman's unexplained rampage. The disturbing series of events started on the morning of March 22nd when 30-year-old Britalia Samantha allegedly carjacked an SUV that 2 senior citizens and 2 juveniles occupied. After getting behind the wheel, Samantha struck and killed a 47-year-old pedestrian named Joseph Stanovich who was walking along the shoulder of the road. Samantha was speeding and diverted from her lane for unknown reasons before hitting Stanovich, according to Delaware State Police. After that, Samantha allegedly drove to a local SPCA parking lot where she hit a 19-year-old woman, causing none life-threatening injuries. And that wasn't the end of the carjackers' bizarre campaign of destruction. She then crashed into a Maserati and carjacked a 62-year-old man who pulled over to offer help at the scene. Next, Samantha drove away with a 77-year-old in the passenger seat and crashed into a minivan. Police finally apprehended the suspect, but struggled to determine a motive for her troubling behavior. She faces a slew of charges, including felony kidnapping, vehicular homicide, 2 counts of robbery, 4 counts of reckless endangerment, 5 counts of making terroristic threats, leaving the scene of a crash resulting in a death, and failing to report a collision. 8. Abigail Clink. 2 years ago, police were summoned to a car rental business in Radford City, Virginia, regarding a stolen vehicle report. An employee told them that a 23-year-old New York woman named Abigail Clink had tried to rent a car after hers broke down, but the company denied the rental. He kindly offered to give her a ride, but instead of receiving any gratitude from Clink, he got assaulted. Abigail allegedly climbed over the center console while the employee was driving, put the car in park, and then punched him in the head twice. A struggle ensued as the victim tried to escape. He eventually got out of the vehicle, and Clink sped off, leaving him in the dust with injuries and a broken cell phone. Police found the suspect at the location of her broken-down car and charged her with carjacking, grand larceny of a motor vehicle, destruction of private property, and assault and battery. She pled guilty to the charge of grand larceny and received a suspended sentence of 20 years and 3 years of probation. Clink found herself back in police custody just a month later when she was charged with several drug-related felonies. She received another suspended sentence and remained on probation, but she fled the state and returned to New York. Several months later, Abigail was taken into custody by Niagara Falls police and extradited to Virginia on many outstanding warrants. 7. Terrifying trio. A 26-year-old Philadelphia man's life was abruptly cut short one day in 2015 when he met up with an 18-year-old woman named Brianna Stewart, who he knew and thought he could trust. She allegedly asked her visitor to pull into a driveway where 2 men were waiting, armed with handguns. They approached the vehicle, pulled the victim out, forced him to the ground, and went through his pockets, taking his wallet, keys, and cell phone. The thieves ordered the man to tell them the password to his phone while threatening to shoot him. All 3 suspects got in the car and sped off, unaware that they'd been captured on surveillance video. Police released the footage, leading them to 20-year-old Sion Lee and 18-year-old Elijah Maddox, who were soon taken into custody. Stewart turned herself in shortly after. The trio faced a slew of charges, including carjacking, robbery, assault, and more. 6. Kershawn Vertman and Nautica Argue. Shortly into the new year, 2 teens from St. Paul, Minnesota, allegedly went on a 10-day carjacking spree, terrorizing residents and victimizing at least 27 people across several counties. The pair, 18-year-old Kershawn Jason Vertman and 19-year-old Nautica Elia Argue, struck in at least a dozen communities, often using threats, force, and violence to get their victims to cooperate. One mother claimed that the teens ripped her car keys right out of her hand outside of a middle school, and they punched another victim's face. Police caught up with the suspects with the help of surveillance footage, which captured some of their crimes, and found them driving around in a stolen Audi. They'd left a wake of destruction in their path, including crashed and abandoned stolen cars. According to a criminal complaint, Vertman and Argue admitted to certain offenses when talking with police. As a result, they were hit with over 30 charges combined, including more than a dozen felonies each. Kershawn told the judge that he wanted a speedy trial and mainly focused on getting to the sentencing phase of the process. This meant that his trial would have to happen within 60 days, but there seems to have been no update in news on how things played out. 5. Dion Marsh. One afternoon in early April, a 27-year-old New Jersey man named Dion Marsh carjacked a Toyota Camry in Lakewood Township. A few hours later, he hit a pedestrian with the stolen car. The victim was taken to the hospital in stable condition and suffered from several broken bones. After that, Marsh allegedly stabbed a man who was rushed to the emergency room with critical injuries to his chest. He then ran over yet another victim, who was also critically wounded. Police arrested Marsh the next day at his home in Manchester Township. He faces many charges, including attempted murder, carjacking, and bias intimidation, which means he's accused of intentionally scaring a person or group based on their race, gender, religion, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or some other demographic. It was later revealed that the suspect reportedly attacked several members of an Orthodox Jewish community. Ocean County prosecutor Bradley Bilheimer reassured the public that authorities believe Marsh acted alone and that nobody else took part in his alleged crimes. The FBI was on standby to provide any necessary help with the ongoing investigation. It wasn't long before the feds made their move and charged Marsh with federal hate crimes. They're accusing Marsh of willfully causing bodily injury to 4 victims and attempting to kill one of them because they're Jewish. 4. Troublesome Teens. 71-year-old Richard Skiaskia was on his way to visit his son in Rochester, New York area last year when he became the victim of an attempted carjacking. While trying to steal the senior citizen's vehicle, one of the 2 perpetrators shot him multiple times and they left him for dead. Skiaskia's lifeless body was later found at the murder site. A few weeks later, police arrested 16-year-old Edgar Tolentino and charged him with second-degree murder related to Skiaskia's death. The other suspect, 16-year-old Anthony Jacobs, remained at large for another week while local law enforcement and the U.S. Marshals Fugitive Task Force searched for him. His mother eventually turned him over to investigators, who charged him with second-degree murder. The horrifying crime happened amid more than a dozen bait-and-switch carjackings in the area, which involved rear-ending or blocking victims' vehicles or following them home and confronting them in their driveway. In the initial aftermath of Skiaskia's death, police said that they believed his murder was connected to the other carjackings. But they declined to comment on whether their position had changed after arresting Jacobs and Tolentino. 3. Trent and Joshua Dunham. Police in Boulder, Colorado were recently called to the home of a man who reported that someone had shot a bullet through his front door. It came within just feet of the homeowner, who was relaxing in his living room recliner and shattered the glass on one of his kitchen cabinets. The shooter also fired 5 bullets into the victim's vehicle, which his gun had disappeared from. Later on, the man told the police that he believed his son, Trent and Joshua Dunham, was involved in the crime. Early the following day, officers responded to a crash and a menacing incident. A driver whose car had been struck said that he was approached and struck from behind by a green Honda CR-V. He pulled over to sort the matter out and instead had a gun pointed at him by the other motorist. The man behind the wheel of the CR-V sped off and was later seen driving erratically and traveling in the wrong direction on a busy highway. A concerned driver pulled over when he saw this happening, at which point the suspect pointed a gun at him and told him to get out of his truck or he'd be killed, according to an arrest affidavit. The suspect stole the truck and was later seen driving recklessly and crashing into a barrier. Police put out a bolo, "Be on the lookout for the vehicle," and located it shortly afterward. The suspect pointed a gun at them when they pursued the truck, prompting 2 officers to fire their weapons. The chase continued as police deployed tire deflation devices known as stop sticks, which deflated the truck's tires but didn't initially get the driver to stop. They eventually disabled the vehicle, and thankfully, the chase ended without the man being shot or shooting at the police. The suspect was identified as Trent and Joshua Dunham, whose father had called the previous day to report that he thought his son had shot his home and car. He reportedly admitted to stealing several cars and credited his mother with convincing him not to fire his weapon in a phone conversation during the chase. Dunham faces a laundry list of charges, including 14 felonies and several misdemeanors. Besides motor vehicle theft, he's accused of illegally shooting a gun, criminal trespass, theft, aggravated robbery, menacing, assault with a deadly weapon, 2 counts of attempted first-degree murder, and being a previous offender in possession of a firearm. 2. Devonta Edwards. A Florida man recently embarked on a late-night crime spree in Lehigh, starting with the carjacking of a Honda Element. He threatened the driver with a gun and then sped off in their car. An hour later, the suspect walked into a 7-Eleven with his weapon in his hand and robbed the store, making off with some cash. The brazen thief then went to another 7-Eleven and robbed that store. Deputies from the Lee County Sheriff's Office arrested 27-year-old Devonta Edwards in connection with the crimes. A look at his past convictions reveals he'd been out of prison for about a year after doing time for vehicular homicide or killing a fetus, driving without a license, battery, and property damage. Edwards was still on probation when he allegedly struck again, quickly landing himself back behind bars. He now faces charges of carjacking, robbery with a firearm, fleeing and eluding, and being a convicted felon in possession of a weapon. Luckily, nobody was physically harmed, but the senseless violence shook locals. Speaking with Fox 4 Now, Lehigh Acres resident Terry Sherman said, "I wouldn't know what to do in a situation like that." He's called the area home for the past 18 years, and while these types of crimes occur in big cities, it's not something he expected to happen so close to where he lives. Sherman pointed out that people seem to resort to desperate measures lately, citing the region's growing population and out-of-control gas prices as potential factors. Lee County Sheriff Carmine Marcino offered his candid opinion to Fox 4 Now, stating that the suspect had clearly not learned his lesson from his past run-ins with the law. 1. A youthful offender. Starting in late March, a 13-year-old boy allegedly went on a month-long crime spree in Washington, D.C. He's accused of committing horrifying acts of violence, including hitting a woman in the head several times with a hammer during an armed robbery, stealing cars, committing a carjacking at gunpoint, 2 assaults, and many other offenses. Sometimes, he reportedly committed 3 crimes in one day. Footage from a Ring doorbell camera shows the suspect grabbing a resident outside in the Kingman Park neighborhood in northeast DC. She screamed for her son while attempting to shield herself with a garbage can, prompting her attacker and another individual to flee the scene. Forrest Kruger, the victim's son, told the local station WSA9 that his mother's a pretty tough woman, but that he noticed the suspect had his hand in his pocket, showing he might have been armed. In hindsight, Kruger realized how much worse things could have turned out. Another victim described her attacker as having a child's voice and looking like he was around 13 years old. One family nearly had their car stolen while helping a relative fix a flat tire. The suspect tried getting in the car and driving off, only to be dragged out of the vehicle by one of the family members, who reported that another person at the scene had threatened him with an assault rifle before the pair fled on foot. The young defendant was charged with multiple serious crimes, including theft, armed robbery, carjacking, attempted armed robbery, and assault with a dangerous weapon. Thanks for watching. Would you rather have your car stolen and walk away frightened but unharmed, or have your brand new swimming pool bust open and flood your yard? Let me know in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you again soon.